Welcome back, everyone, to the Property Journey podcast, episode 27. Welcome, Roy.
Morning, Chris.
Nice wee Easter break there, just back after it. So, a bit of time off, plenty of ideas, I'm sure, swirling about that head of yours, Roy.
Loads. And actually, a new landlord signed up as well, new investor. So, it's a good thing about being off, gives you a bit of quiet time. So, I was able to make a couple of calls. So, new client on board, which is always good.
Good Easter break for yourself then.
Fantastic.
I wish I could say the same. I was out pounding the roads. So, feeling a wee bit sore today. Today's topic I wanted to touch on is property valuations and the negotiation side as well. So kind of just wanted to deep dive into that. A lot of people sometimes maybe are unsure about how your house is valued, or how any property that you may have is valued. And then obviously then, if you are valuing it, you would assume that you're selling it. Therefore, then that leads into the negotiation side of things. So in terms of today's market, kind of what factors would influence a property's valuation?
Well, there's a number of things. I know what indirectly inflates it is if you look at the properties that achieve higher rents, the listing of it, so when it's been advertised, it looks like a show house. Everything in the house, there's no clutter, it's modern, it's meticulous. Take together a fantastic estate agent who has professional photography, video tours, commentary, all of that, who really push it and market it. Put those two together, you normally find that increases or helps boost the value. We do see other listings, for instance, whereby maybe the estate agent uses maybe more older fashion methods, things like that. The photographs are very poor. You can pick out those properties, the values are below what they should be at.
And that's obviously influencing in terms of the marketing side of things. How you market the product, obviously it boils down to anything really. If you market a product well, it's going to achieve a higher value. But is there things such as maybe location, or that maybe being in a nice housing estate, would those things kind of influence then a valuation as well?
Location always has a big impact. So depends on are there main roads in and out of it. Is it are the local schools, local shops, things like that are always key. And another thing as well is probably the newer the property. The newer the property has a big impact as well, because everybody likes everything brand new. And there's some developments that it's a prestige thing about it as well. There's the demand for it. So even if somebody doesn't get a brand new house, whenever there is a resale in that development, there's high demand for it. I could pick out, off the top of my head, there's Drum Meadow in Portadown. There's the Spires in Portadown. There's the developments out the Long Lane as well in Portadown. All well-known developments, and once the resale comes on, they're sold straight away.
And then obviously probably the style of the house is a big factor then obviously in your valuation. So detached is obviously going to be better in terms of a price point for, rather than maybe a semi-detached, or obviously terraced row. That kind of all has a knock-on effect. I suppose then would 3-4 bedrooms, that side of things, maybe extra rooms or garage space, maybe even land around the house. I'm guessing that all then has to be taken into sort of a deciding factor for the valuation of your property.
Yeah, so generally the bigger the house, the more expensive, the higher the value. So for instance, you've got a townhouse, which is simply like a row of houses, which traditionally used to be known as a terraced house. So that's a terrace house, not a tourist house. So terrace house. Then the next after that, you have a semi-detached. Then you get up into the detached, and normally the detached are slightly bigger than maybe a 4-bedroom, 5-bedroom. Then if you start adding on garages, sunrooms, bigger gardens, maybe a bigger driveway to get multiple cars in easily. Start adding all those on, that all increases the value of the house as well.
So then that kind of leads us on then to, obviously when someone's coming to value your property, how would they determine kind of where your property's at, and then kind of what you describe as a fair market price then?
Well, if we look at it from a selling point of view, and if we look at it from a buyer's point of view, so if you're looking at it from a seller's point of view, that's you going to sell the property. So what most people do is they'll call up an estate agent and they get the estate agent out, and the estate agent will give an indication as what they might think the house could sell for. Now, that's only an indication. Normally, I would suggest in that case, maybe look at other houses in the development. Keep an eye on them. Have they sold lately? Who has been the estate agent? What sort of money have they sold for? And that gives you a truer picture of it, as opposed to, what the estate agent might think. Also, take a non-biased view on it as well. Everybody thinks their house is the best and is brilliant, and they look at the one down the street and they think to themselves, oh, mine's better than that. Or they might think, oh, mine's a wee bit bigger, or the builder was going to keep this house for themselves and it's better, it's a corner site. Take that all out of it and just see what's selling down the street, and maybe knock a few pound off yours, just to set expectations fairly. So that's looking at it from a selling point of view. If you're looking at it from a buying point of view, oddly enough, it kind of goes the other way around, as backwards, in that normally a house goes in the market, people bid as to what they're willing to pay for it, and then, only then, once it goes sale agreed, if they go through the mortgage process, a mortgage company will get a valuer in to value the property to make sure it's not too much. So occasionally it can be the case where the valuer comes out and says, no, hold on a minute, the price that you're paying for this is far, far too high. So it's kind of a backwards way compared to selling.
And obviously then it's, as you say, it's kind of finding that balance between what maybe a seller's willing to sell it for and what a buyer's willing to buy it for.
Exactly.
You've kind of touched on it there, but what's the difference then between a mortgage valuation and then a full property survey? I think we've kind of touched maybe on previous episodes about this, but give us a refresher.
So a lot of people assume that if a bank surveys a property, everything's brilliant, the house is fine, and a buyer will use the term survey, survey by the bank, but the bank's not carrying out a survey, they're carrying out a valuation of the house. So they're just checking to make sure that you're not paying too much money for the house. A house can be falling down, the roof can be no roof at all, and it's still worth what you're paying for it, and a bank can still lend against it. Now, there's times they send the valuation report out to you, there's times they don't, there's times they maybe make recommendations for extra reports and surveys to be done, but ultimately you cannot rely solely on that valuation. So if you move into the house and if you find damp or electrics issues or what have you, you can't blame the bank. It's up to the buyer to have their own survey carried out. So for instance, whenever we're acting for buyers, we can then assist them, get a survey carried out for them. We can take care of all of that for them, have that booked in, have that carried out. And what that is doing is checking, is there damp? Are there maybe alleyways or a shared access into the property? Is it checking, was there an extension put onto the house? All those things which are not necessarily issues with living in the house, but it can also cause legal implications too, which is all being caught out or caught up at a very early stage.
So essentially it's an independent property survey.
Independent property survey is what you should be getting carried out every time you buy a house. Doesn't matter whether, I was going to say, it's a brand new house. If it's a brand new house, it comes with a 10-year structural warranty. Normally anything over 5, 6, 7 years, you should be looking about getting a survey carried out, and the older the property, the more in-depth of a survey you should be getting.
That then sort of head us towards in terms of sales then, and we've kind of we're talking there about whenever you're investing in property, about increasing value. You can obviously do the same then if you're selling just your own home house as such, you know, your family home, or if you're thinking about moving house. How kind of would people then look about increasing a property's value? Would it be a case of making sure that it's kind of sitting like a show house, but like a paint around the walls just to make, you know, freshen it up a bit? Or
The very simple is you remove all clutter from the house. You know, when somebody's viewing the house, you know, you want them to think that they're coming into a house, not coming into someone's home. So, you know, if you have things left sitting out, you know, your personal bits and pieces sitting out,
the family portrait.
exactly. You know, if you have all those things, or even, you know, the post. You know, the post comes in. If you throw it in the corner in the kitchen or what have you, you know, nobody wants to see that. They want to come in to see a home. To see a house. They want to then start visualizing themselves living there. So that's the first thing. The second thing is if the house can be extremely presentable, because depending on some people, I know I'm like this. I struggle to picture or to visualize things in a house. So if a house was empty, you know, I would struggle to see, well, where would I put the bed and how much space is in the room. Whereas if you've got all, you know, their kitchen, dining table, the sofa, the bedrooms all kitted out, it's very simple to see, well, this is how spacious a room is. Or, you know, maybe need a bigger sofa, maybe if there's friends coming round, what have you. So having it well laid out is also important, and then also having it, well, in an ideal world, you would have it modern, so that a buyer is thinking to themselves, well, I don't have to put down new carpet, I don't have to paint, you know, it's all the modern trends ready to go.
And because we've touched that a lot of people nowadays, they want to be able to move into a house and have to do very little.
Zero.
You know.
Zero work.
Can you blame them? No. I'd be the very, very, very much the same. In terms of valuations then, how does the market then kind of, slightly different in Northern Ireland, we keep touching on it, we're in a bit of a property bubble, so valuations tend not to change very much other than go up at the moment. But in terms of short term and long term, how does the market then kind of affect property prices on that short term, long term basis?
Well, a big thing which can impact the market would be home movers. So a home mover market for years there was just very steady. You know, the prices weren't rising too much. Well, you know, rising fairly, but not excessively. Coming out of COVID, things were crazy. Everybody was moving house. That market has now settled, but it's still, that we can see, is still rising. So, you know, you still have the next generation coming through, whereby they bought houses a few years ago. It's a semi-detached house. It's a 3-bedroom. They've started their family. They need that bigger house. So that is all having an impact. That, together with fewer houses being built, is driving the market, thankfully, upwards.
And I was going to say, and like that's kind of short term at the minute. Long term, we kind of see it going fairly similar. You know,
in simple terms, the cost of building, you know, is getting crazy. So it's, in some occasions, it is actually cheaper to buy a house than it is to build a house. So like we've seen a number of scenarios. Now you're talking at the bigger, at the top end of the scale, you know, maybe a 6-bedroom house, or a 5,000 square foot house. You know, those bigger houses, you know, they're selling for, depending on the area, some examples we've seen, £700,000, you know, fully built, fully mature garden. At that sort of money, you could not build that house. You could not build and finish that house. And to have that house, to go and buy a site, to get planning permission, to build it, to put in the gardens, you're talking years. Whereas for that level of a house, you can buy it straight away.
Yeah. Kind of touched on this one a wee bit, but obviously, what role does location really play in the valuation? It really is down to kind of people's preference as well as the location, you know. So if people's preference is to be in the town or people's preference is to be in the countryside, location is going to play quite a key factor in them choosing to decide to buy a house.
Exactly. We're starting to see probably a spillover from the very large towns into the smaller towns. So years ago, I can remember, back in the early 2000s, everybody wanted to be in those larger towns. So when it come to buying a house or renting a house, that's where it had to be. I come across times where you were trying to rent a house in the small villages. You couldn't give them away because nobody was willing to travel. There weren't the bus links and the transport, schools, anything like that. But there's now those smaller towns, so the likes of Warrenstown outside Lurgan, Market Hill, Rich Hill, those sorts of towns are really thriving at the minute. If you have a good house, nice house, it will sell very quickly, simply because people want that more closeness, as in a wee bit more personal, maybe getting to know their neighbours, their surroundings. But ultimately, in those areas, there are fantastic schools, primary schools, and that is another draw for bringing people in as well. So people are thinking down the line, right, I want, we're going to start a family, or we've got a very, very young family, we're going to have to be thinking about a school. Where's that going to be? And that's what's drawing people into those villages now.
Yeah. And they're becoming, but I suppose, as you say, maybe even the properties in some of the bigger towns aren't as available now. The properties now in the smaller towns, that's the areas that are being built up. They're becoming bigger towns essentially because there's more houses being built in those areas. They're growing more as well. That leads us to negotiation. What's the biggest mistakes that sellers can make?
Ooh, that's a good one. Probably the big one would be over expectation. Some people, they maybe put a house in the market and they think to themselves, oh, it's worth this much. It's a lot more than what it's maybe marketed for. And if it's on the market and you're not getting any bids, well, you have to take a look at it and take a look and see what is going wrong. If you're, it's very simple, but people are very much, I don't know, say the word arrogant about it. They think theirs is brilliant. But if you're not getting anybody in the door, they might blame the estate agent. Occasionally it might be the estate agent's fault, but most of the time the product will sell itself as well. So if you have a bad product, you can't get anybody in the door. And if nobody's willing to get in the door, or nobody's willing to place a bid, well, there's something not right there. Is it the product? Is it the price?
9 times out of 10 it's the price.
Yeah.
How should then, because that's obviously a seller's point of view, in terms of potential mistakes, as you say, over expectation. Your house is potentially valued at 160. You decide to put it on for 200 grand. It's realistically not going to work. But in terms of a buyer then approaching and making an offer, or negotiating for an offer, how should they sort of approach that? Because as you've mentioned now, there's bidding, and people are nearly going into a bidding war. For example, the house is on the market. There's maybe 3 or 4 people interested in it. How are you kind of approaching that situation then?
Probably what a lot of people do wrong is, particularly buyers and first-time buyers, is they go and see a mortgage advisor, get a mortgage in principle, probably for the maximum that they can afford. So let's say, for instance, the maximum they can afford is a property at £180,000. They then go and look at houses at £180,000, which ultimately means then that they're probably, if there is a bit of a bidding, it's going a lot higher. Whereas really, if the maximum you can afford is 180, you should be looking at houses in around the 150 mark. So it's probably setting expectations. So I think always, when I was younger, it was always the same about a car. It was, yes, you wanted to have a nice car, you had the saving for the car, but then when you bought the car, the insurance was higher, the fuel, it needed more fuel, the maintenance was higher, and they ended up, you're actually living beyond your means. So,
and then you had the old car tax there as well. Every year. I suppose one of the things I would probably point out there as well is going over and above a fair market value.
Yeah.
Yes, if you really like the house and it's the one that you want and that, you know, you're very adamant on it, and you decide to bid not an extravagant amount, but yes, the asking price is maybe 155 and you decide to maybe go 165.
Yeah.
You know, that's fair enough. That's the house that you want. That's the one that you want to go for. But going to an extravagant bidding side would be probably a point out, maybe.
You know, again, you maybe find a house, you fall in love with it, it's definitely the one that you want. And if you do get into a bidding war, well, be prepared. There's a line, and if you go higher than that, you have to then say to yourself, what can I sacrifice for this house? You know, some people, they want everything. You know, they want the nice house, they want the nice car, they want the holidays. So there's nothing wrong with having that house. But maybe be prepared, right? Well, if I can't have that house, if I want that house, it's going to cost me more. I have to make a sacrifice here. Does it mean selling the car from a brand new car, maybe drive around in a 5-year-old car or a 10-year-old car? Does it mean, you know, only going out for lunch or dinner once a week as opposed to 3 or 4 times a week? You know, people don't realize that all those small things add up. You know, having a newer car is probably an extra couple of £100 a month. You know, going out for breakfast or lunch, you know, there's easily another £40-50 plus, maybe a week.
Yeah.
You know, again, factoring in your clothes, all our cosmetics, smoking, coffees, all of that, and you can't have it. Most occasions you can't have it all.
No, and especially, you know, it's always nice to go out and have something to eat out or even get a takeaway in and whatnot, but you know, it's very easily now £20-25, £30. If you're eating out even for lunch there, you could be into, as you say, the £40 or £50 mark a couple of days a week or even once a week. You add that up over the course of a month. You know, nice big chunk out of your monthly salary, you know, is going towards that stuff.
Go towards a house that maybe you can't afford to leave it. So well, then you're getting the full use out of it. Maybe I'm just getting a bit boring as I'm getting older. If I could wind the clock back, I would have a different type of house. You know, to me, why spend so many hours in a house? You know, you're already sleeping there 8 hours, 7 hours. You know, just simply, I'm now at a point. It's coming into the spring, the summertime, weekends. I plan to be away from my house as much as possible and simply out and enjoying life, out with the kids, out doing activities. I'm not saying going and spending and blowing money, but you know, away doing things, activities, and enjoying life as opposed to just being stuck in the house.
Well, and it's not even that, it's the maintenance side of things as well. You know, if you buy a big house or you build a big house and then you have a lot of ground around it, and then before you know it, then you realise the grass needs cut or it's trimmed and it takes you half a day to do that, and then the fences need painted or the house maybe itself needs painted, and then you get stuck into that, and you know, your summer holidays, for example, if you have a week off in the summer, before you know it, you've just spent it doing your maintenance and then you're back into work again. Didn't get much of a break.
Exactly.
You know, so these are all considerations, as you say, that you need to be thinking about. This one probably, how do you handle valuations when obviously a seller's expectations don't match that reality?
It is very tricky, very tricky. Occasionally we would come across times when the seller says, no, that's it. That's what it's selling for. If that's the case and you're mad in love with the house, you have to stump up that money. The bank will say to you, listen, the house is only worth this much. They'll only lend you this much. So the difference has to come from somewhere. So if you're not able to stump up that extra money, then you have to walk away from the house. Now, a sensible seller will say, right, well, I don't want this potentially to fall through. Let's work this through. Maybe, okay, I did think this was getting carried away and the price is far too much. Let's go for a more realistic price. Or very simply maybe meet in the middle where you negotiate it. So there's all those different options to play. It's up to the seller to have sometimes a bit of common sense. Again, sometimes the problem is the sellers went shopping off the back of it, off their sale, and they can see their sale doing really well, getting a fantastic price. They've then maybe went and overstretched on the house that they're buying, and then they can't afford wriggle room. Whereas if they've been sensible on the house that they've bought, well then there's room for maneuver.
Yeah. And as you say, probably there as well, you know, if someone hasn't got an or the expectation that they got isn't going to match the market, you know, you're going to be sitting with the same house because you're not going to be able to sell it for the price that you're wanting.
And it's nearly a gamble by the seller, because if it then falls through and it goes back to the market, they may not get that value again or close to it, because if it falls through, you know, the underbidders will be approached, and sometimes an underbidder might get cold feet to say, well, why did that fall through? Is there something not right with the house? Maybe, nah, I don't want the house. Or they maybe get carried away in the bidding process and they realised, you know what, I'm glad.
Yeah.
I wasn't lumbered with that house. You know, it's far too dear. I went and looked somewhere else. So it's a big, big gamble. And we see that quite a lot, where a seller could have, it's went overpriced. They had an opportunity, the seller had an opportunity to renegotiate it. They played hardball and it ended up, they lost tens of thousands less.
So that kind of then leads us to, what advice would you give, or sort of your opinion on it, to first time buyers when it comes to negotiating that price?
Probably be cautious. I was always taught by a good businessman years ago, when everybody else is running, you walk. And what I mean by that in this scenario is, if there's loads of people interested in it and bidding on it, you know, so if you see it advertised at, say, for instance, 115,000, and you phone up and it's sitting at 125, well, think to yourself, well, there could be a few people interested in this. If I stick another bid on it, that's just going to rally up even more. So be cautious. On the other hand, if you see a house and there's no offers on it just yet, don't necessarily rush to maybe put that offer on. Find out a wee bit about the seller. What's their circumstances? Is it the case whereby they're not in a rush to move, or they are in a rush to move? Because that could be something that you could work to your advantage. You know, if it's something where somebody's selling, they've agreed on their house, they're mad looking to move, well, you could very simply say, right, here's my offer, let's go, let's get this done and dusted. And sometimes you maybe, you know, put in an offer maybe a few grand over the asking price to tempt the person to make sure, right, take it and run. You know, there's this myth whereby the seller has to take the highest price. They don't necessarily. You know, it's all about circumstances. If you're sitting as a first time buyer ready, so you've got your deposit, you've got your mortgage offer sitting there, a lot of home movers love that opportunity, because they're not waiting on somebody to sell. Yeah. So they're not going to drag, they're not going to slow the thing out. Or if you're in a situation where you're a cash buyer, again, that can be very attractive as well. The only one thing I would say is, if you are a cash buyer, genuinely make sure you are a cash buyer, because we hear stories all of the time where people say they're a cash buyer and they're not. They may be cash buyer subject to the sale. Mm-hmm. They may be, you know, cash buyer subject to their parents selling the house to then give them the money. Or, you know, there's loads of scenarios. To me, a cash buyer is somebody who has the money in the bank and who is willing to use that money to buy the house. Yeah. There's other scenarios where people say they're a cash buyer, they've got the money there, but really their intention is, I'm going to take a mortgage out on the house. So,
and then that's, I mean, as you say, before you know it, then you're down trying to get a mortgage across the line, trying to get that money in from the mortgage company. Then before you know it, they've maybe thrown up and say they need to do another valuation report or whatever, and that adds another week or 2 weeks on, and the seller then that was expecting to get it across the line in 6 weeks is stomping and spitting fire, because it's now 12, 14, 16 weeks down the line. How do you kind of see then going forward the valuation side of things in terms of properties? Is it just a case of where we just keep talking about the market, where valuations are going to keep creeping up?
Nobody knows what way the market's going to go. You know, I was always taught, you know, property market looking ahead is basically like all you can see is driving a car when all you can see is out the back window. So there's positive signs there, in that, you know, there's a shortage of houses, population is growing, cost of building is expensive, so it's cheaper to buy a pre-owned house. And also there's a prediction that the interest rates are going to drop. The recent reports or predictions are that interest rates are going to be dropping 3 times this year, that's what it was saying in the press yesterday. So if that's the case, the cost of borrowing is going to be a lot cheaper.
Yeah.
There's also probably fewer investors coming into the market as well, just simply because some people are maybe getting a wee bit bored of property, and for a number of other reasons, not from a negative point of view, but that's then fewer houses out there available to rent, which means the only option is to buy, to live in. So they're all the positive factors which could indicate that the market will stay strong.
And that means then the price of houses will stay kind of where they're at, or keep ticking up.
To be cautious, we never know what way the market's going to go. You always have to be prepared. Is it going to go down? Is it going to go up? There's always a possibility it can go down, but so far the factors are all positive.
Yeah. Well, sure, all we have to look at is what Donald Trump made one announcement and our markets went into turmoil.
Yeah, exactly. You never know. You never know.
So it's, as you say, everything's a risk. Especially when, as you say, even if you're buying a house, you're taking on a huge amount of debt, that you're going to have to pay off at some stage. And when you take that on, you always have to sort of, what we would say, discuss that risk and make sure that you understand it before you take it on. That's valuations and negotiations, Roy. Thank you very much. Episode 27. We're flying through these now, so we're
pleasure.
That'll do, folks. Make sure to tune in a couple of weeks' time for the next episode.